Welcome to another Confluence podcast. I'm Randall Stevens, and I've got Evan Troxel with me as usual, and we've got maybe our first repeat guest. I can't remember if we had somebody on.
That's a big
I think so, but if you're wrong, I mean we're both wrong.
I know. Somebody can fact check, right? It's like on X, whatever community note. Somebody can make a community note about it. But anyway, we've got Carl Veillette from Newforma with us. I was looking back because I was reviewing, the last conversation we had, and it was almost a year ago. And I was joking just before we came on here that I'm a year older, and I've started letting my hair grow out because I had it cut pretty short on that last call. But glad to have you back on, Carl. And, one of the things I think about, we literally have about a year under our belt from the last time we talked, but things are moving, pretty quickly with these kind of technology shifts. So I think it's appropriate for us to kind of jump back on. And because last year we were beginning to talk about how's AI going to affect some of these things. I know you guys have been working on some of these strategies at Newforma. And then also kind of topical was that we just put out recently this Confluence technology stack survey. So I know you've had a little bit of time to look at that. It's kind of fresh off the presses, but there's a lot of things I think that are in that report that, kind of sets the stage for just this complexity of the ecosystem, which is a lot of what we were talking about a year ago. So anyway, but welcome back on. And maybe we can kick this off. I was reviewing some of the stuff that you've been talking about over the last year with what you're doing in Newforma, and one of those things is you kind of refer to this information sprawl and how they kind of get this golden thread that can kind of weave back through. I talk about the same thing with AVAIL, that there's this thread that we have a feature called related content that's like lets you connect this information. But maybe we can kind of kick off there and maybe explain what you mean by that golden thread, and then we can kind of dig into maybe this application sprawl and just where all this information is.
Yeah. So I think when I think about our tech stack these days, and I guess that relates to the survey that you guys did recently, right? But the tech stack is growing, and there's a survey we did a few years back, and we asked the question, how many tools do you have in your toolbox on a project, right? And the answer was 15, right, at the time. And what struck me in your survey is the number now is 84, right? So that's 84, the number of tools that organizations are leveraging, right? So I think this is this is great because people are taking the best tool for the task and the activities that they have to perform, right? So this is great for the industry, right? To be able to, have more technology choices and best-in-class tools for specific things that they are trying to do. But at the same time, it is creating a bit of governance issues, right? When it comes to data, right? And I think what we've seen in the last year is this increase in amount of tools and storage silos, and it creates data sprawl issues, and it's preventing you from gathering insights and things like that. And think about the golden thread, right? In the UK, it's a big thing because of the regulations in place, right? And this is also contributing to that data sprawl and those information silos to break the golden thread, right? I think about the golden thread of information as the ability to go back, maybe like 10 years down the road when the project's done, and be able to reconcile the audit trail of what happened, when, who sent what to who, right? And the ability to understand the context of the project at the time, right? So for me, like a golden thread is not necessarily a single source of truth, because this thing, in my opinion, doesn't exist.
Sure.
There's multiple sources of truth, right? And it's all about trying to connect the dots together, right? And I think, a lot of people talk about common data environment and those sort of things. Vendors call themselves a common data environment, which I think doesn't really exist, right? It's a series of interconnected tools that exchange information. So really, like, the mission we've been about in the last couple of years. And I think that's a mission that's even more difficult these days now that there are a lot more tools, right? Is to connect the dots so that we can create a single view of information as opposed to a single source of information, right? So, when it comes to technology adoption, I think one of the biggest challenge is, change management, right? Because we're all humans and we like to work, say it a certain way. We don't like to change things, right? So, really where we've been focused is not trying to change the way people work, right? But also create kind of an information layer that connects to those various best-in-class tools that people use. So you think about Microsoft Teams, right? So it's unlikely you're going to displace Microsoft Teams these days because it's the communication channel number one, right? For project teams, right? And I guess I would argue people thought they were going to replace emails, for a few years ago, right? And this never happened. It's not going to happen. We look at the statistics, right? Number of emails increase on projects these days as a result of more complex projects and bigger teams and regulations and such, right? So I guess the data proves everybody wrong on this. I was the first to think we could replace emails and bin track days, but this hasn't happened. So now we just have to connect those things together, and that's the approach we've been taking. Is like, okay, there's going to be instant messaging in Microsoft Teams. There's going to be meeting minutes captured with AI in there. There's going to be emails. So those are all communications related, right? But you're going to have like a flow of information. Maybe a designer works with a GC that's working out of Procore, right? So you've got all those information coming from various sources, right? So instead of replacing those sources or trying to be the center of the universe, why don't we connect those things together, and then why don't we create another trail kind of a layer, a data connection system that integrate with those tools and bring the information in the context of the project. So when the last phase of construction project kicks in, I'm talking about litigation here, you've got the complete project record, right? You've got the evidences, you've got the information that's been shared. So for us, it's really been looking at, where is the data flowing from, and kind of connecting that with the project activities, right? So for us, that the golden thread is that ability to look at the complete project archive, right, from the very early stage of the project all the way to delivery and beyond, right? So,
Carl, when I was looking back at the conversation we had a year ago, one of the examples you gave was, we were talking about, synchronous versus asynchronous communication, how, chat and email and all these different forms of communication. I agree with you. I think every time somebody thinks something's going to come along and replace the other, it just means we've just added another source or a form of communication, and it's hard to stop. But my question would be, when I think in that last conversation, you gave an example where something had gone into some litigation, and they had looked back and said somebody had given like a thumbs up to a message, which was like a tacit approval. So do you think, are you all experimenting, or do you think that AI is going to be able to help? Because you can get a lot of data points, obviously, and you can get a lot of information that on its own looks is not in the right context. And it seems like the LLMs, that's one of the things that they're really good at, is if you can get a good enough context window, it's like, okay, I can kind of boil this down. So I guess my question would be, are you all thinking about using those kinds of technologies proactively, so that if somebody had, let's say somebody gave a thumbs up, should the system say, do you mean that that's approval, or you like that? What does that mean? So you could think about using,
or it says, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that.
Right. Or just to be clear, is this right? Because you can imagine you'd want, if it's something for approval. And then ultimately, because we've been doing some experiments with it too, I think a really good use case of the LLMs is to take, kind of sparse, detailed information and roll it up into things that, have meaning to different people at different times. So kind of what are you all seeing on that front?
Yeah. So I think I would just take a few use cases of AI, and we just rolled out our first AI feature in last year. So I think AI can play a role in multiple things. It can play a role in collecting information, which is exactly what we did with our first implementation. So I can talk a little bit about that. I think it can also help, you're thinking about information at scale, right? And, in my mind, there's no question about the fact we're living in a data intensive world these days, right? And I look at the size of projects archived 5 years ago and what the size of projects archive looks today. The tools on the market have made it so easy to create more and more data.
Yes.
It's almost like we've reached our human limit of how much information that we can consume, crunch, analyze, whatever on a project, right? So I think you would think more tools equal more efficient workflows. I have doubts about that, actually. When you look at the index of productivity in construction, it's been flat, right, at best. So I feel like those tools are making certain activities more efficient, but it's also like contributing to the information overwhelm, right? So I think crunching and analyzing information at scale is only going to be possible through the power of LLMs, because you would probably need like 10 people to look at the whole project information, try to figure out the project summary, where are things at, right? But now with LLM, you can build like a search engine, on top of your data layer on the project, and then you can start to interact with that LLM, and it's going to be almost instantly giving you answers for millions of data points, right? So I'm really fascinated about the ability to summarize information, right? To make informed decisions. Search doesn't really sound sexy when you say it fast, right? But it is fascinating, the dimensions of what can search provide on the project, right? So you're thinking about informed decisions, right? So think about code compliance, for instance, right? So these days, veterans are retiring. People are struggling with knowledge, right? The corporate memory that they've, evolved and developed over the last couple of years. And you've got you've got those folks retiring. You've got you folks coming out of school. They're not experts in building codes. That knowledge that has evolved, from best practices and know-how throughout the years. It's hard to transfer over, right? And people are struggling. But what is the role of AI in there? AI can actually help onboard new staff members by transferring that knowledge, right? So you'd think AI these days has trained itself on national building codes, city regulations, and all those sort of things, right? So what if AI was brought in the context of you're reviewing documents before they issued out of construction, and it's raising flags. Oh, you forgot about this, you forgot about that, right? You're about to issue something that that is not compliant with the code, right? There's a missing fire vise here, right? That doesn't meet the fire protection part of the building code, right? So think of it as a safety net, right? But also to help potentially train new staff members that maybe there's an omission on the design, right? And they didn't see it, right? And now you're exposing yourself for litigation down the road. So I think those are practical examples of AI. And I think we're talking a lot of AI about the ability for AI to crunch and find information, search, the ChatGPT out there. Everybody talks about that, but AI can actually also play a role in connecting data, and that's exactly what we did last year. So we released an AI system that actually helped collect email from your inbox. So it's kind of like a smart scanning system that scans through your inbox, collect information, associate them with the project automatically, so that you've got a decision log where every project record exists. So again, when litigation kicks in at the end of project, you've got all evidences. You can fight back and be efficient during the course of the project when searching for information and documents shared and so on, right?
So that primary use case is a historical kind of use case to crawl back through it. Are you all thinking about though how you can use that technology to be proactive so that there's not, well, I guess in your example of training and coaching along the way, that's a good example of trying to be proactive instead of reactive to
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we've got a unique position because we're sitting on top of 20.3 million projects that ever went on our system. So that's a lot of data, right? And
Sure.
so the next step of our journey is going to be agentic AI. And then we're setting the foundation for that agentic AI system. And so those agents would be performing various different things. Like I was talking about code compliance. We've got some other examples with the ability to answer RFI responses, things like that. But we also see like somewhat of a knowledge agent, right? That would just basically pop up, and then tell you, okay, you're designing a project right now where you have a green roof part of the design, right? Well, your firm has worked on the green roof before, but it wasn't called green roof on this other project. It's a sedum roof, right? But it's the same. It's related. It's semantic association, right? So it will start to bring other examples of that design and bring additional documents inside. Maybe like that green roof ended up having a bunch of like change orders or issues or additional RFIs that came in because those information were missing from the construction documents, right? So it would bring those lesson learned from other projects so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, right? So that's kind of like the idea of where we're going with this. We're, as I mentioned, we're sitting on a lot of data, but also it's the relationship between, the data itself and what happened, right? So you kind of need that golden thread to be able to provide like those insights. So, did you run into issues after construction, right? So if you don't have those, data point and those relationship between the items, right? Between that RFI or that contract change item, that's related to the design, it's hard to predict. It's hard to provide those insights, right? But we do.
Carl, we were talking in a podcast that we just did recently with the guys from a company called Twin Master, and they've been working on digital twin, how to kind of broadly, how do you contextually tie all this information together? And one of the parts of that conversation were around like code, and I just want to get your thoughts. It seems like that the safe approach to that, because nobody wants to claim that they're giving you the right information, is to let the customer bring that information to the system, and then let the system use that as a source of information to give information back, as opposed to you saying we've got that information. How do you all think about that? Because as code compliance can be very specific to different jurisdictions.
Yeah, I actually had a quick chat with the guys from UpCodes recently, and they have a great platform. It's building a very extensive building code library, if I can say, right? And they've got some AI to make some searches in there, right? So yeah, we had an very interesting conversation, about some litigation that went on around the building codes, and should you be able to train and build AI and ownership of like the law, right, and those sort of things. But I think they would make a good partner like for the things we have in the roadmap. So being able to tap into the library of codes is not something. I mean, trying to maintain a code library is not something that is Newforma's mission, that's for sure. But like kind of leveraging that to be able to apply it to specific construction documents, visual artifacts and things like that is something that we're definitely exploring, right? So I think we're playing different roles.
Yeah, I haven't kept up with what their strategy was, but are they, just off the top of my head, it would seem like if you could end up basically befriending the jurisdictions, because they're the ones doing the code review. So if you could go to the city and say, actually, we've got a system that will not only take your requirements, but check the incoming stuff coming in, and that way you would at least have,
Yeah. No, I think I would envision, we could geek out on this, right? But I would envision an integration between Newforma, because we're managing the workflow, right, for issuing construction documents in our system through that control, right? I would imagine like their code tying into like we've got the project address, location, and such, and then I could easily envision like they would be suggesting the applicable codes, and then would be kind of building some AI around that to kind of analyze the construction documents. So I mean, we own the process already, and they own the library, so it would be a great partnership.
I just
that's
want to
my
give
request of codes.
I want to give a shout out. I love what Upcodes is doing, and I also want to give a shout out to another platform that's doing exactly what you're talking about, because I don't think Upcodes is doing that, but it's called Archistar, and they're working with specific jurisdictions because it's very difficult to roll that out. I've talked to other people who say in the U.S. alone, there's 30,000 different jurisdictions that have their own version of code adoption.
Sure.
And so they have different years of code adoption, different layers of code adoption. And so it's a super difficult problem to solve. But Archistar was doing that for that exact reason that you just mentioned, Carl. It's like, and Randall too, like it's you're working with the jurisdiction to say, we want to take the load off of you, and we want to help the design professionals make this whole process go faster. And I think you're right, Carl, like pairing that with the project data like you're talking about, and not just current project data, but project data throughout the firm, right? And so I guess my question is with a tool like Newforma and kind of the depth to which it goes, I think the hard part for bigger firms has always been user behavior. To get, and I know you release this AI tool to kind of mine the information autonomously, because why? Because users suck at this. Like, users are notoriously bad at archiving the data and archiving it properly for their future selves, because every project is a new startup, right? It's a new team, it's new constraints for the site, it's a new project brief, it's all of these things. And so a lot of times we just file bankruptcy at the end of every project, right? Not literally financially, but literally as far as the team goes and knowledge goes, and then we start fresh. And so I'm curious how you guys think about that, and how it seems like you're thinking, well, AI can help with this, but I mean, you've seen this before, right? That this kind of weak chain link that is in the system, which is the actual user and their behavior.
Yeah. So, I gave the example with the green move earlier, right? Which is, okay, trying to gather information. I'm going to give you another example of like some of the things we have in the kitchen right now. So, like, I was talking about search, right? But when you've got like a new intern coming in the firm, and they are trying to figure out what projects have been delivered by the organization before their time, right? It's not an easy thing. You think about project proposal, right? There's an RFP, right? And then this intern is gonna have to kind of like do a little bit of a research exercise here, try to figure out how many hospital projects they delivered before, where are the files, right? It might be in a CRM somewhere, they might be on a SharePoint, they might exist in multiple locations, right? So one of the things that our assistant going to be able to do, because we're connecting with those various data sources, right? We're tapping into SharePoint, we're tapping in local file servers, we've got connectors for all of those things, right? You're going to be able to just go in there and ask, give me the list of the proposals, no matter where they live, right? For their hospital projects that are above $1 billion in value, right? And it will just give you all the proposals. Okay, now help me write a proposal for this. Here's a template, right? And then, bring the resume, bring the, so those things exist, right? They're just like, it's data sprawl. It's living in different silos. It's all over the place. There is no process for it, right? So it can really help, not just the training, but the onboarding of those new staff member, and tap into that collective knowledge that's been created by the organization for the last decade or so, right? So I just think about like how much time would be saved in that context as they write that proposal, right? So there's a startup in Toronto. It's called Workorg. That's what these guys are doing. It's pretty cool, and they have connection with CRMs, and so I can see AI playing a big role in both the onboarding, the training, the quality control, adding additional security nets, around more junior staff members. So that's a very exciting time because it's multidimensional, if I can say, right? So I think there's going to be the more we think about it, the more we're going to find use cases for almost every activity of the project. Just think about legal, right? I was talking about the last phase of construction project being litigation, right? Imagine you're reviewing documents, right? And then something pops on the side of the screen says, you've run into litigation about that, in previous project. So pay attention to this. Here's how much it, this created in terms of costs, at the project level, and it was a debate whether this or this was good, right? The firm ended up losing the case, for this, right? So you could also bring those type of insights in the context of the project activities. So that's very exciting.
No, I just want to say that would be incredible because, again, it's not even the same team that was on that other project where litigation happened.
Correct.
And the current team doesn't know, right? And so that would be incredible to be able to source that.
And it's almost like we're not building planes here, right? So almost every project is different. And then the project starts, you've got a set of different teams. They have to learn how to dance together, right? If I can say, right? So it's almost always like a new kind of learning process and how we're going to collaborate, which tool we're going to use. So it's a very dynamic environment, and that creates a lot of uncertainty on the predictability of the project outcomes, right? The schedule, the deliverables quality and such, right? So I think it's if we can alleviate some of those through the use of AI, and just thinking about the data intensive era that we're living in right now, AI can certainly help us stay on top of it.
A little bit of, I guess, maybe a little technical question just to hear how you think about this. So when you talk about feeding this information into the data, bringing the context windows and all this information in, can you actually just dump everything in, or do you need to think about a kind of specific additive process for the information that is that correct? Because there can be bad, incorrect information. I was thinking when you were talking about training, a young professional that's just come in, if they have access, if you're pointing to everything that's been back there, not everything necessarily is even correct or good.
Yeah.
How are you all thinking about that? And because it's obviously easy. Everybody wants to just throw everything. I just had somebody on our team say that we've got a customer that's wanting to point at 12 million files to dump into our system. It's like,
because more is better, right?
Well, it usually is, and anybody, and I'm guilty
Quality.
of it too. It's like
Quality.
Well, if you're a technologist, you like to, you also like to break things. Like, okay, I'm going to push it to its limits and see where the edges are. But just kind of back to this idea that you all do have all of those projects and all that dense information. You're talking about millions and millions of files over time inside across thousands of projects. Do you have to take, if you're the CIO sitting in one of those operations, do you have to begin to think about plucking out, specific information to feed into the system? Or do you think that the AI tools that we're either have in front of us or near term are going to be able to help us discern what was good and bad information, or help to do that? What's your thoughts there?
I mean, the way I think about it is that, garbage in, garbage out, right? So, I mean, just dumping a lot of unstructured data to an AI is quite risky. So it's like at the end, just think about a specific use case, right? Like, I mean, let's say you're building AI that's going to be helping GCs on site find information from construction drawings, right? Okay. Construction drawings, there may be multiple revisions of it, right? So if you don't have a good structure, it's easy for AI to get confused and give you the answer from the previous revision, and then all of a sudden you've got an issue with, the concrete pour on site, right? They didn't put the right rebar, whatever, right? So I do feel like the structure of the information that you're feeding AI with, right, is very important. I almost think about the project as the way we're approaching things is everything is timestamped in our system, right? So I've often, where AI is going to get confused, it's going to take a superseded set of drawings, or it's going to be taking conflicting information from an email, and it's going to be superseding, the answer from the latest construction documents, right, and things like that. So everything being timestamped, you can actually create like a timeline on the project, like a conceptual timeline. So, this is how we've structured the information so that we ensure that, competing information, is not confusing the AI, right? So I think, having a good data structure behind the scenes is very important. If you take, if we took our project archive as is, and we just dump that to a ChatGPT and we start to ask ChatGPT questions, it's most likely it's going to provide you wrong answers. It's going to use a wrong document, or it's going to use an email where some information wasn't official, but it was shared in there. So at the end, I think it's very important to look into the backend system that's created to manage the data in the first place, to collect the information, to structure it. So
I would agree, but I've been trying to train myself because, I've been doing technology now for 35 years, and I'm finding out, the old saying that really good software is indistinguishable from magic. It should really be magical. And we're watching, I'm using some of these tools, and I'm like, it is really amazing.
It's more magic than it's ever been.
Well, it's magic. And I've got we had a friend of mine who's one of the world's, renowned machine learning and computer vision guys who, keynoted CCV this past year. He told me, I don't, when he tells me he doesn't understand it, I have a little solace in because usually, if it's technology, I want to learn enough about it to at least have a construct to say, okay, I can kind of understand what it's doing and how it works. I think we're in the middle of this, of a new wave where we can't even wrap our heads around it. So what I was going to say about I agree, my tendency is to say, you want good structured data to do this, but I also say, well, if I gave that to a human, how would they decide what was relevant or what wasn't? And if a human can do it, why do we think that we can't have an AI agent doing that too? So, it may not be today, but maybe it's just around the corner. Then it's like, maybe it can, because I think we have to ask ourselves, if a human could do it, why couldn't the AI engine do it? Because I think that's what wave that we're in right now of this, fast rolling kind of updates and changes to the way this technology works. So anyway, I'll throw that out there. What?
Yeah. No, it's funny because I hear a lot these days, across all industries, right? Like there is a sentiment that AI is going to disrupt like large enterprise softwares like Salesforce or Oracle, things like that. And, you can see, you go in the stock market and, these stocks are crashing right now. It's just, so I'm like, this is really strange because AI is not going to disrupt enterprise software because those software have data. And AI is only as good as data that it's being trained on, right? So I think where the value is data. It's not the AI itself. Now, AI is a mechanism to crunch the data to make something with it, right? But I guess the world we live in at Newforma is we have this data, right? So we're going to be building things with AI on top of that, right? But at the end, this is where everything converge, right? If you have data, there's value, right? So you can do something with it. But if you don't have data, then you're just going to be the flavor of the day because there's so many of those AI tools. At some point, you may ask Claude AI to build an app that crunch, documents for you for code compliance, right? And we may not be that far away from this, right? So people are going to be able to create their own AI flavor. But if you don't have the data, then, you cannot train it out on it. So that's where the value is in my mind. It's, who owns the data, right?
So let's talk Tech Stack Survey. What I was looking back when we put that thing together. We had there was over 400 kind of applications that we kind of knew about, and literally it was let's just see how many people click and say, I'm using that, we're using that, and literally just to take an inventory. There was a little bit of nuance to it in that for each one that they were using, we asked on a scale of 1 to 5, is it deep penetration, deep in the workflow, or just here and maybe not being used very much. And that was at least you could read that in a lot of different ways, but it actually, as we pulled that data, you could do quite a bit of kind of analysis across not only the tool stack, but that kind of sentiment for how deeply rooted the things are. What I was going to say though is we broke those apps up, those 400 apps up into 20 different categories. I think Newforma ended up in the same category as we put our...
That's very strange, because when I think about our respective platforms, we don't do the same thing at all, right?
Yeah, completely different. And that's what, my excuse is it was the first year we did it, and we were just trying to figure out, like, okay, how would we break this up into some, broad categories? There's probably some nuance that we need to add the next time we do it, right? Which would be, so that was going to be my first question, is what category... What kind of broad area would you call where Newforma lives, and what other applications kind of live in that same, like is Autodesk, part of Autodesk platform would be considered along those same workflows? Or
yeah, so we play in a different. It's we get a strange position because we're playing on different fronts, right? But we're not doing the actual work. So let me explain that a little bit. So in your survey, for instance, there was a communication category, right? We're not Microsoft Teams, we're not Outlook, but we're connecting with those, right? So we're like, when it comes to email management and those sort of things, we've got some of the best in class features for that, but we're not Outlook, we're not distributing emails.
Yeah, you're
right?
not the core application.
Yeah,
you're the
exactly.
connective tissue between those, right?
Exactly, and that's we're talking about the golden thread, right? And I think that's kind of the role we're playing. We call that project information management, right? And we've been calling it this way for 20 years, and it's almost like we're category makers in the space because there isn't other solutions that do that to the extent we do. So we connect with ERP system. We're not an ERP system, but we're going to be enabling, just like knowledge architecture does, right? Feeding from ERP systems to create projects so that people don't have to do it twice, right? So the information flows, it's being reused, we recycle information. Same thing with construction administration, right?
We do the same. We have the same problem. We call ours, by default, we call it a content management platform, but usually most people think of that, they think that we're not going to be that information, but really what we do is connect in very much the same way you all do to where those pieces of information are, and basically fuse it together into one, kind of view.
Yeah,
is where our value add is. So what should we call that next time we do it? Is there a category?
I mean,
bridges, connective tissue, bridges, or
project information management.
Yep.
I mean, there's a few players out there that use that umbrella term for similar things, right? I would argue that we also do a lot of construction administration, right? We've got other features around that. So that might be an overlap with Autodesk, for instance, right?
Sure.
We're certainly not competing with Procore because they do construction management. So they're from the general contractor side of things. We take it from the designer perspective, right? We actually have a good partnership in connectors, with Procore. So people love it in general. So we were playing on that front too. Think about BIM, right? We're not the clash detection software. We're not, we're not an authoring system either, right? But we've got some pretty unique, issue tracking features and functionalities. So I guess we do play in the BIM coordination kind of space. So there's a lot of softwares in that space. So again, with information and management in mind, we're not detecting clashes. We're the bridge between, those Nanosworks and Celebrity software to the authoring system, right? So we relay the information, we make it accountable, We create the history, the audit trail. We make the workflow more efficient, but at the end, we're not a differing system either, but we're also living there as add-ons and add-ins, right? So we're kind of connecting the dots, right? So that's the role we're going to play.
I think it's interesting that you're explaining all these different places that you play in, and I bet most of your users know you for one or two of those things, not all of those things.
Yep.
And so, like, I think this kind of comes back to the idea of what a brand is known as or known for is really up to the customers and not the company that makes it itself. Because if you asked me what Newforma was and you asked Randall what Newforma was, we might have two different answers. And somehow you might want to try to reconcile all that. I don't know. Maybe you don't. But like when you ask that question, Randall, I kind of think you want to go to the users and say, what would you put Newforma in? And you're going to get a lot of answers, right? And then it's the job of try to reconcile it. But it's like when you say, AVAIL's content management, and well, it'd be interesting to see if people think of it as something different than just content management.
As we were, and really, we're not professional surveyors, and we were doing this as a
You're
side
not Dodge data.
last fall. Yeah. There wasn't a ton of resources to do it, so we did our best. But in hindsight, by trying to split this stuff up, we were trying to put each application in one of the 20 broad categories.
And you just can't.
And in reality, like you're saying, Carl, it's like, oh shit, you could have been a little bit over here and a little bit over there and a little bit over there, which then, if somebody taking the surveys in that section, it might have been like, they were probably just responding to what they did. We did have the ability to write in, so if we were a glaring mistake, they would write in like, how come you didn't have X, Y, Z? But it also could have just been like, hey, we're just kind of responding to what you put in front of us, as opposed to really thinking about, if I ask you without any of that in front of you, he might have said, oh yeah, we use Newforma and Procore for doing that work, or, those parts of the flow. So I think that's going to be a challenge for us to think about how to do it. But, like anything, it's like almost you have to put a stake in the ground and say, I want to create these kind of buckets. And it doesn't mean that they're perfect, but at least gives a conversation.
Yeah. It's like, what's a collaboration software? Is that a characteristic of a workflow, or is that an actual category, right? I mean, you can ask yourself that question, because like almost everybody these days have collaboration features. And I mean, as soon as you've got multi-users collaborating together, is that called collaboration?
Sure.
Like, what's the true definition of a collaboration
you can share a
software?
link in AVAIL, so it's not collaboration.
Yeah, is that collaboration?
Right? Yeah, part of, there was actually two categories that kind of related specifically to what we do, and I think to what you do, and that was, basically where are the primary, I'll just call it data storage locations. So what does your file system look like? Are you using SharePoint? Are you on ACC? Or, there's places where there's literally file storage. And then there was another category that was more like content management, or that I'll say a layer above it, which is we use this, but some people would consider SharePoint that, right? They think of it as like a website, back to what you were saying, Evan. I think it's like, to the user, that's not a storage location. That's like a website, because of the way the interface to SharePoint
is. Or an intranet, or
I always remind people, it's just OneDrive back there. It's like, it's just files being stored somewhere, and then you've got some skin on the front of it. But what we did find from if you take both of those sections of the survey across across the 100 plus people that responded to it, they averaged about a dozen of those locations in use. Which part of what we were wanting to show was there is data sprawl. We're not only producing more information, it's living in more places, and now the end user has to know, is it over there, or is it over there, or is it over there? And I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger part, which is what part of the problem that we're trying to tackle. And I think you'll, operate the same space, which is like, look, this data is living in a lot of systems of record. How do we fuse it all back together?
And I was looking at AVAIL, and it looks like you guys are doing pretty much the same thing than we do. So we don't really want to host like all the data, right? So we're kind of like connecting with those various different data sources. So we connect SharePoint, ACC, like local file server. We have Ignite, and those, other players like Panzura and SUD and such, right? So we're not a storage platform. We're not an EDNS, but we're providing a view into those things. So as information is being shared outside the organization, there are proper retention policies for files. You can calculate document control so that you can meet standards like ISO 19650, right, and things like that. So kind of like ensuring the compliance and the governance layer on top of those various different locations that exist. So like we're kind of trying to play Switzerland in a way that we're neutral, right? And we're going to be connecting with the various data sources used in the project. And, you think about infrastructure projects, people are going to have files on ProjectWise. Well, guess what? We connect with ProjectWise. They're going to have some maybe files on that same project. They're going to be Reddit files hosted on ACC, right? So when you're using all those systems independently and you're trying to manage like issuance and things like that and get proper audit trail, it's quite hard, right?
I know you're a relative newcomer to Newforma, but how long do you think that term governance has been in use in general? Because I would think Newforma, if it was going to be talked about, you all probably would have been one of the early ones to at least conceptually talk about what it means to govern information across. Any idea of when that came into the vernacular in this industry?
Yeah, no, I think, as we saw the industry evolve, and I think, AI and cloud has certainly like, I would say, woken up a lot of people on governance, right? And I think the proliferation of tools has made it a thing in the industry. I'd say, for the last 5 years, I've seen IT and CIOs and organizations trying to get a hold of their data and understand how the data flows in your organization. And I think it has become a top concern. And I guess like the industry report says so as well, right? That's becoming an increasing problem. And especially because data is gold, right? So, and in that AI era that we're living in now, so I think a lot of people are getting either concerned about where the data is and concerned about their ability to tap into their own data and how they're connecting it and how they're consuming it right down the road. So organizations are looking at strategies for that in our time frame. Right? I think, you guys do it. When you look at the content, like libraries, like details, things like that, right? So it's really cool to be able to reuse information like that coming from various data sources and leverage that for making like ongoing projects more efficient, right? So that's just one example of what technology can do these days. But yeah, I'd say governance in general. And Newforma, I think we see also that there's a lot of regulations. You think about the Building Safety Act in the UK and those sort of things, which require decision logs and things like that to be documented, right? So regulations are also pushing organizations to get better governance in place, not just from a series standpoint, right, but from project records, right? You think about contracts, right? You've got retention policies for data set in contracts. It's been the case for the last 2 decades, right? More actually, right? So how do you make as you grow your tech stack, can you really truly get there into a contract where you've got project retention policies and after X amount of years, you got to delete the data? It's not easy.
Yeah, that's tough too.
It's tough, right?
Yeah, I've had those conversations because a lot of the, you take something like Miro, which is, being used quite a bit, but it's like, it is cloud first. You're in that database. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to archive that? How do you archive it? What if that, you can keep your account and they may keep your boards around, but what if they aren't around in 5 or 10 years? What does it mean to archive that kind of information? I think it's I don't think anybody's figured it out yet.
Yeah. I'm just thinking it's fun facts, right? We used to have backups for 7 years worth of data, right? And recently we had to shorten the period because 7 years is too much. I mean, if a customer has retention policies in place for a project, maybe their policy internally is to get rid of the data after the retention policy is set, right? Maybe that's because they're worried about the growing storage costs. maybe they just don't want to have the information when litigation kicks in beyond that date. And I've seen examples of that.
Sure.
Yeah. So some want to keep it as a backup to be able to fight back, but some they just don't want to have the data in their hands. So
Sure.
So we ended up realigning our backup length, for retention policies purpose, right? So it's easy with Microsoft and AWS these days to have just change. Okay, now I've got 10 years worth of retention there, and it's gonna, because you have it means you have to provide it, right? So if litigation kicks in again, the court's gonna ask for it. Well, guess what? It's in there.
Yeah. There's a litigation side. It reminds me though of years ago. I had a friend that worked. He was an engineer and worked at a pretty good sized company, and he told me the story about that. People started just in meetings saying, well, you said this, 6 months ago. So they started to have this policy that said if it was said more than 30 days ago, it's as if it didn't happen because things change. So it's you can't point back to something I said a year ago. The context may have changed, or whatever.
This gets back to your question earlier, Randall. Like with if somebody throws 12 million pieces of data into a thing that they want to cut cross sections through and get insights from, it's the same question, right? A lot of that is old information, and so what I like to think of that as is what the concept is. What I think should happen is information should have an expiration date, just like laws should have an expiration date, right? Or at least let's revisit them. But no, it's just additive, right? And the old stuff's in there, and it's just data. And so to qualify that, I think is it's a very difficult thing to do. But same goes for what did you say in the meeting 30 days plus ago doesn't apply anymore. Well, chances are that old data, it might have a different usefulness, but it may not answer the question that's being asked. And so that whole context is so incredibly difficult, challenging to address, but also extremely important.
I've been working on a concept. I'm writing a white paper. I'd love to share that with you, Carl, and get your feedback. But I've been talking about it as capital resources. From a business standpoint, it's you want to have your information, you want it to have value. So thinking about it in terms of capital resources. But part of the thinking is that as you create these pieces of information in whatever form they end up living on, we're missing the right contextual wrappers of data around that. Maybe it's an expiration date. Maybe there's certain parts of this that can have value over time, but other part not over time. And I think what our challenge is going to be as the people developing these technologies is those systems have never been in place. Back to the Tech Stack Survey, you got 100 to 150 applications. And you know what? They're pumping out information every day. And it's but we're missing, I've been saying for years, we've been missing the idea of a content router. We think we have technology, our networks have routers, and there's rules about that information as it goes, those bits go across and where they should go. But we've never had this concept of, as we produce information from all these systems, there's nothing that one says where it should go. But I think you can extend that, not only where do I want to store it, but what is the contextual wrapper of metadata around that lets me now know what to do with that in the future. It's all, it's buried inside the files, which complicates it.
Especially when it's in a proprietary file format, right?
Yeah.
So you may not even have that application any longer. I just an anecdote from a digital practice leader at a firm. I mean, they talk about this idea of data sprawl that you've brought up a few times on the show, and the practice is we can't control it. There's too many people. Everybody's got their way of doing it. They all have their own preferences, which brings so much chaos to this process, right? And so they just said, ultimately, we've decided that it is the project manager's, it's their charge at the end of a project to make sure that happens. And my next question obviously is, well, does that happen?
Of course not.
Because like, what hooks does a digital practice have into a project manager? Like zero. They don't have any, right? And so there's no responsibility between those two different entities inside of a firm. It's a standard and the firm says it, but does it actually happen? And the answer is most likely no. Like, it probably still doesn't happen. But it's why? Because what if litigation? What if we want to use that information on the next project? What if? And of course, like, that would all be useful. And at the same time, like, there's so much information. And at the end of the project, do they actually build in the time for somebody to be able to do what seems to me like kind of a monumental task? I doubt it, right? So it's a tough situation.
And I've heard that many times. And, we've got customers knocking on our door, with that exact same problem, right? Now their litigation goes up, right? They got more lawsuits. They lose the case because they don't have the evidences, right? And then so they start to look into ISO 9001, right? They start to look at structured data, their processes and all of that. And then, at the end, what they're seeking is like, is there something like an information backbone, a platform that can help us restructure our processes, how we connect data, how we archive data, and that's often like how we get in touch with those folks, right? We got some customers that were referred to us by lawyers, but which is kind of strange. It's a funny story.
Put them on the payroll. Yeah, I was gonna when I first started working on what became AVAIL. I was always trying to like quantify or how to figure out how to describe the scale of the problem of this data. And one of the things that I've said for years that I was like, if you think about every piece of software that we're all using, we're all like information workers now. We're all sitting behind a keyboard with some piece of software producing information. And the way I would always describe the scale of the problem, at least a part of the problem, is every piece of software that has a file open and a file save dialogue requires a human to now do something. Mm-hmm. Where is it? And now that I've produced it, where should I put it? And that's what got me thinking about this idea of like a route. Like, you would never ask your router where those bits should go on your network. So I'm like, I
mean, look at a phone, right? I mean, at the phone, there's barely a file system.
It was the first one to, that was our first little bit of a taste. And Google, Google Drive was at least, but even there, right? We still have basically folders and places that we put stuff in those.
But they hide it. They obscure that stuff.
It's obscured behind there. But we're trying to solve some of these problems. I'm sure Carl, you're in the same. But I think we got to keep pushing on this. That there needs to be this metadata. I don't know if those can become standards or de facto standards around how to put the right contextual information wrappers on this stuff, so that these systems, this is part of what we were trying to do with this Tech Stack Survey too, which was at the Confluence events, to talk about these systems. We've got so many of them now, and they're not necessarily talking to each other. So I'm glad to hear, you all continue to work on your own connectors. And we did a little webinar yesterday where I had some people on talking about this. And, part of it was, framed it as you've decided to use these tools to accomplish certain goals and tasks. And then you've got another tool to do another task. You have to find a third tool that's trying to help you solve the problem of bridging, because those two systems don't talk to each other. So can we get back to can we just have better exchange of information between the core platforms and systems that are in use? And then maybe that'll absolve the need for another tool that's trying to fill those gaps. So I was referring to it as a theme. It's like, you can go, you choose the tool because you think it has value and it's going to bring value, but it breaks down at the seams where we can't get these things talking to each other. And that's where you pay the cost of the friction of getting that data moved back and forth, or knowing if it's the right version of the data that you're trying to retrieve.
And it's the APIs, and it's a various system, and it's also the native files. We're just talking about that, right? Like, you think about like native files format, and that create additional barriers for consuming information, right? So that's the reason I'm allergic to native file formats, in a way that we've always created bridges and created open APIs. And we've got those indexer with our secret sauce, right? Which is basically our way to index native file formats of the industry, like CAD files, Revit files, things like that, right? So we kind of index all of that. But the goal there has always been to free the data from the files, right?
Get them in a database somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like the reason why people call us the Google search of construction projects. Often, like, I'd say if you asked most of our Newforma customers, the common thing that would come up is Newforma as a search engine. Right. And so that's kind of it's a strange category to be in as a software vendor in this space.
That's what goes on the survey, Randall. They go in the search category.
Right.
Search engine.
Well, it'll be interesting. I'll use your all's help and anybody's help that wants to help to think through what's the better. And like I said, you can live in multiple categories, so it's kind of hard. Do you put everybody in every category that they might be in? That way, you're at least collecting. Are they thought of being in that? But anyway, we'll figure it out as we go. I think it'll be. I'm already looking forward to at the end of this year doing the survey again. Just so we'll have trend data. I want to see, hey, how much is this stuff shifting or moving, and where are we seeing movement across these applications that are in the stack? But well, it's good to catch up. Maybe we'll make this an annual thing every February.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll put it on the calendar, and I wish we would get out to more shows, just to be able to see each other, because obviously.
We should catch up. So we've got our Newforma World event coming up in the beginning of May. So if you guys want to swing by, it's going to be in Florida, where you're welcome. We also have a bunch of exhibitors and all of that. So if you're ever interested in that,
I'd love to check on that. And then I'd be remiss to not remind. I don't know when this podcast will be out, but we're doing 2 one-day Confluence events, one in Seattle, April 2nd, and in Chicago on May 20th. So if anybody's watching this and it's before those dates, go check out the Confluence website page and get your info on those events. But those are also good. We just try to do those regionally and get, people together for a day and have these kinds of conversations and then drink a beer afterwards and socialize a little bit. But anyway, good to have you back on. Glad to hear the update on the progress and helping to. This is going to be a never-ending battle. So, but I do think that the frequency that we can talk about some of this, because of the way that especially these AI tools, are just rapidly. I go back and forth from being like incredibly excited and incredibly nervous. Like you said, I think if you do watch the stock market. Like you said earlier, the enterprise software companies have been taking a beating.
Yeah.
But I heard, I think it was Brad Gerstner or one of the finance guys saying that a way to look at that is that, the stock market, you're always paying future value. It's not so much that the companies aren't performing, it's that we can't look as far ahead as we used to be able to look ahead, because things are changing pretty quick. So there's a discount right on those by saying, I used to think that you were good for 10 years. Now I'm only, confident that it's good for 5. So there's like a discount to the stock price that's happening, which I thought was at least for those of us in the software.
It's time to know that.
It's like comforting to know that you're not just going to get, disrupted overnight. But we could probably have a whole nother call on, vibe coding and what does it mean to write stuff on top for those of us that have APIs. What's that going to do? And, I tend to think it's like this software sprawl is only going to get worse before it gets better. And anyway, there's a whole conversation about whether or not being able to, for individuals, even within these firms, to start writing tools on top to be those. But within the organization now, all of a sudden it's like, now you're managing even more pieces of software and even more maybe places where this information's, all those tools are going to start producing more information. So it might be this exponential explosion of data that's now being generated, and without these, I'll just keep beating on, without these contextual wrappers, where that stuff can be governed, and where's the audit trails on all of this. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting in the next few years to see what happens.
The era where we had to procure software is gone. So now like people are making software, and that's a pretty scary moment to live, right? Because, information can be anywhere, right? And it's generated in different ways. And you've got, everybody in your organization works, with their own tools that they created, right? So it's gonna be fun to watch the next 12 months for sure.
But
as things become more accessible, right?
For all the other, the tech geeks and the people that are developing these tools, maybe we can just kind of wrap this up with how much are you all using? Are you using AI to write code now? Are you using Cursor? Are you using Claude? Or what's going on inside Newforma for that?
We do a lot, and I would say that it has made some software we use for security scanning even more important, because now they're generating that code on the fly with AI, right? And AI is validating the code, right? So you've got less humans in the loop, right? So how do you make sure that you comply with the security controls and all of that? So we had to start, with more security vulnerabilities getting software. So we had some, we have more. And so that's how we're going to go after this, because we're not going to be slowing down. AI generated code is going to keep going, right? So so that's changing practices for sure, and how we build software. We kind of have to, because speed is everything, right? So we're not reluctant in leveraging those technologies, because if we don't, someone's going to be going faster, and we do, right? So I think it's I think the same applies for the AEC space, right? Because if you got an architecture or an engineering firm right there that's using AI, and someone's kind of anti-AI, well, I bet this organization is at least struggling with productivity, and competitiveness with the other that's using AI down the road, right? So it's people should absolutely start to embrace that and think about how this is going to change your organization. So
always a good conversation. Like I said, I wish we could get together, at some of these events. So I'll check out your all's May event. That would be maybe a good opportunity. Evan, good to see you as usual.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you, if not sooner, next February. Thanks for joining.
Cheers.